Dear participants, welcome. Today we will talk about a very important initiative in child protection and support, the PCSOS project. PCSOS stands for Protecting Children in Sport, developing safe and inclusive sport organizations. This project, supported by the European Union, is not only an education activity, but also an important legacy for the future. We all know that sport is a wonderful tool for children's development. It builds resilience, discipline, teamwork, and self-confidence. But if children's safety is not ensured, the sport environment can also become the place where the biggest traumas of their lives occur. This is exactly why the PCSOS project exists. One of the main strengths of this project is its international and multicultural structure. We are not only working in Turkey, but also together with experts from different countries and cultures across Europe. This allows our child protection approach to be both aligned with universal principles and sensitive to local needs. Here we all share the same responsibility to make sport a safe space for children. Because without safety, success, medals, or trophies have no real meaning. During this session, we will look at the different types of child abuse, how common they are, and how they can be prevented. I kindly ask you not only to listen, but also think about how you can apply what you learn in all your organizations. Real change begins with knowledge, but it only becomes reality through action. Now, let's look at our second slide. Here we see the main goals of the PCSOS training units. Our aim is to make sure that everyone involved in sport, coaches, referees, managers, volunteers, and even parents, understands what child abuse is, the different forms it can take, and the consequences it brings. When people hear the term child abuse, they often think only of physical violence, but that is a very narrow view. Abuse can also appear as psychological pressure, economic exploitation, neglect, or even digital bullying. That's why in our training we approach the issue from a broad perspective. What makes the PCSOS model different is that it does not only focus on legal or medical aspects, it also includes cultural and educational dimensions. Every society has its own way of raising children, its own sports culture, and even its own language use. For example, a behavior seen as a motivation tool in one country might clearly be considered abuse in another. Our goal is to raise awareness of these differences and teach how to act according to universal principles. The model also pays special attention to children in adolescence and to athletes with disabilities. These are the groups most at risk of abuse. They are vulnerable because they are still developing, and very often they struggle to make their voices heard. The conclusion we should draw here is this. Child protection is just not a procedure. It's a matter of awareness. When this awareness exists in the minds of coaches, managers, and parents, then we can truly build safe supporting environments. Now we begin our main topic. What is child abuse? The concept of abuse is very broad. Here we focus especially on psychological violence. This is one of the most common yet also one of the least recognized forms of abuse. Psychological violence includes any kind of threat, pressure, humiliation, or coercion that harms a child's emotional integrity. It often appears before physical violence, serving as an early warning sign. Research shows that about 68% of children in support have faced psychological violence at some point in their lives. That is an incredibly high number. So, what does this mean in practice? For example, a coach repeatedly telling a child, "You're not good enough, you'll never be an athlete," or teammates excluding a child and leaving them isolated. These actions do not leave physical marks, but they cause deep and lasting wounds. They can lead to loss of self-confidence, dropping out of sport, and even lifelong psychological trauma. This is why we must never dismiss it just words. Our shared responsibility is to become aware of the impact of our language, our behavior, and even our facial expressions on children. Remember, for a child, a single sentence can shape the rest of their life, and we must make sure that sentence is empowering, not destructive. This is why the PCSOS project does more than define the concept of abuse. It also asks each of us, through my own behavior, how do I contribute to children's safety? Thinking about this question is one of the most important steps of this training. Yes, now let's take a closer look at the first two types of violence: psychological violence and bullying, including cyberbullying. Psychological violence, as we mentioned earlier, is often invisible, yet it causes the deepest wounds. And it is not only about shouting or making threats. Sarcastic remarks, humiliating comments, constantly belittling a child's achievements, or making them feel inadequate all fall into this category. Knowing that 68% of children in sport have experienced this kind of abuse should be a wake-up call for all of us. Now let's look at bullying, type 2, bullying and cyberbullying. Bullying, whether physical, verbal, or through social exclusion, is very common in sport. It is built on imbalance of power between children. For example, when one athlete repeatedly treats a teammate badly, leaves them out of the game, or humiliates them in front of others. But today, the problem is not limited to the sports field. It has moved into digital spaces as well. Cyberbullying happens through messages, insults on social media, or exclusion from online groups. Research shows that in sports settings, 56% children have experienced physical bullying, 32% cyberbullying, 23% verbal bullying, and 13% social exclusion. The critical point is this: some children remain silent when they face such attacks, thinking this is normal, it happens in sport. Even some coaches may wrongly see it as a way to build resilience. But this approach is not correct. Sports should be a place where the children grow by supporting each other, not by putting each other down. So, let me ask you, when you see an example of bullying around you, how do you react? Often the easiest choice is to ignore it. But as educators, coaches, and managers, this is exactly where we must step in. Because staying silent means normalizing these forms of violence. Now, we come to two types of violence that are very common in sport, but whose effects can be even more severe: physical violence and economic violence. Type 3, physical violence. In sport, physical violence can take many forms. For example, forcing a child to overtrain as a punishment, hitting or pushing them, or even presenting violence as a so-called discipline methods. Unfortunately, the data shows this reality. 52% of male athletes and 36% of female athletes experience at least one incident of physical violence in sport before the age of 18. This is a very serious number. The greatest danger of physical violence is that it pushes children away from sport completely and breaks their bond with it. Type 4, economic violence. This is perhaps the least discussed, yet a very important issue. It includes cutting scholarships, distributing sponsorships unfairly, or exploiting a child's success for a financial gain. All of these fall under economic abuse. According to 2021 Global Athletes' Rights Survey, 51% of athletes reported experiencing economic exploitation during their childhood. This type of abuse not only their bodies, but also directly harms their future education and life opportunities. Another dimension of economic violence happens through families. In some cases, parents or sponsors pressure children using money or scholarships, threats like, if you don't succeed, we will cut your scholarship, add enormous stress. But a child's relationship with sport should never be built on economic pressure. This slide has an interesting title, Care Injury or Excessive and Distorted Care. At first, you might ask, can too much care cause harm? The answer is yes, when care is not age appropriate and when it comes to performance driven or overly controlling, good intentions can turn into harm. Let me give some examples. Maximizing diet and supplements for records can lead to energy deficiencies and hormonal imbalances during growth. Trying to speed up recovery with so-called miracle treatments can trigger chronic overuse injuries. Always being by the child's side, not allowing mistake and blocking independent learning can reduce self-efficacy. So, what should we do? 1. Follow medical ethics and child development principles with age-appropriate training loads. 2. Stay cautious of trendy methods outside evidence-based plans. 3. Explain consent and approval processes in language children can understand. 4. In every meeting, confirm that health comes before performance. Remember, care should always serve the child's well-being, not the club's prestige or the adult's ambitions. Too much or the wrong kind of care can, just like neglect, turn into abuse. Now we come to the most difficult topic, sexual violence. The definition on the slide is clear. Any sexual behavior or contact without consent through manipulation or through the use of authority. In sport, the risk is higher because of power dynamics, such as coach-athletes, older-younger athletes, or manager-athlete relationships. Let's make some distinctions. Non-contact sexual abuse, inappropriate words, suggestions, exposing a child to nudity without consent, or sharing pornographic material. Contact sexual abuse, any unwanted physical touching. Hidden manipulation, using promises of future success or guaranteeing selection as a way to exploit power and create closeness. Our institutional responsibilities are 1. A zero-tolerance policy with clear procedures and sanctions. 2. Safe reporting channels with anonymous options and protections from retaliation. 3. Mandatory training and background checks. 4. Evidence-based case management with a victim-centered approach, including medical and psychosocial support. My message is clear. Covering up sexual violence to protect the club's reputation is a second form of abuse. Institutions with the proper procedures not only protect children, but also become the more trustworthy in the long run. Type 8. Stockholm Syndrome. This slide is about a situation where the victim ends up defending the abuser. In support, this often looks like an athlete rationalizing a harsh, humiliating, or punishing coach by saying, "I succeeded because of them." Sometimes they even block complaints themselves. Why does this happen? Dependence, the desire to be selected, to stay on the team or not lose a scholarship. Isolation, team hierarchies and group pressure. Unquestioned obedience, a culture of absolute authority. Our duty as educators is clear. 1. Teach children awareness of their rights, human dignity, safety, and bodily integrity. 2. Break the myth that harshness equals quality and instead model respectful yet demanding coaching. 3. Provide independent guidance and safe channels for confidential conversations. And let's say this out loud. "He broke me to build me" is not a success story. Real education finds the balance between safety and high expectations. And next is type 9, cross-cultural barriers. This issue is especially relevant in multinational sports environments. When children from different cultures share the same space, misunderstanding and communication problems can arise, and this can make them more vulnerable to abuse. For example, because of language differences, a child's complaint may not be fully understood, or a behavior that is acceptable in one culture may be seen as a violence in another. Research shows that cultural barriers increase the risk of abuse by 10 to 15%. Children from migrant families, teams that include athletes with disabilities, are particularly vulnerable. They face both communication challenges and higher chance of social exclusion. Our responsibility is not to ignore these differences, but to highlight cultural sensitivity. A one rule for everyone approach is not enough in child protection. Policies must take language, culture, and social context into account and create tailored solutions. Because child protection is not only about physical safety, it is also about building trust. If a child feels misunderstood, even they are experiencing abuse, they might struggle to speak up. That is why removing cross-cultural barriers is so important. And now we come to management processes. This is a slightly different perspective. What we mean here is that in sports management, processes are often focused only on performance. Think about it. The entire training plan of athletes is tied to one date, the competition day. Everything is designed to reach peak performance in that moment, but in this approach, how much attention is really given to children's safety, health, and psychological balance? That is a big question mark. When management focuses only on success, children's needs can be overlooked. Rest periods may be cut short, injury risk ignored, and sometimes children are pushed to carry loads far beyond their age. To prevent this, we need balance in sports management. Performance is important, of course, but safety is even more important. We need management models that guarantee children's participation while supporting both their physical and emotional development. That is why the PCSOS project reminds us management processes should not only be reactive, but also safety-oriented. We must create an environment where children feel not only ready to compete, but also safe and supported. Up to this point, we have looked in detail at the different forms of child abuse and how they appear in sports environments. Now, I would like to briefly explain the structure behind the PCS project and who we are. The PCSOS project is not the work of a single institution or a single country. It is carried out through the joint effort of experts and organizations from different nations. It brings together universities, sports federations, civil society organizations, and public institutions. This diversity is our greatest strength. Every country has its own experience and every institution its own perspective. We combine these differences to build a common European standard for child protection in sport. But let us not forget, this is not only the job of institutions. Individuals also carry responsibility. Every coach, every manager, and even every parent is a link in this chain. And if one link breaks, children's safety is at risk. That is why cooperation is essential. Our goal in this project is clear: to make sports organizations not only focus on success, but also safe and inclusive, to raise not only good athletes, but above all, safe athletes. As I close, I have two requests for you. 1. Honestly identify the gaps in your own organization and take small but decisive steps. 2. Make this approach not just a project, but part of your institutional culture. Because safe sport is not the job of one department, it is our shared responsibility. Thank you very much for listening.